Happy morning to all my dear students. Welcome to Science Online Learning. Today we are going to learn chapter 12 in Science, Producing and Storing Food. So now it's time for us to revise what we have already learned in our previous class. In our previous class, we studied how to look after our resources. Resources are nothing but the things we can use. For example, money, machines, and land. And all the natural things we use are called natural resources. Example, air, water, soil, rocks, fuels, plants, and animals are all natural resources. So we studied how to take care of our natural resources. First, we discussed about fuels, and we also learned that one thing we can all do is to stop wasting the fuels and to use other alternative sources of resources like sunlight, wind, and water, because sunlight, wind, and water are some natural resources that will not get over. Next, we studied about forest and grasslands. So since forests maintain the environmental balance in many ways, we must be very careful not to destroy the forest. So what can we do to take care of a forest? We can recycle. Since lot of trees are cut down to make paper, we can reduce the need for trees by recycling the old paper. So this is how recycling saves the resources. Next, we discussed about wildlife. We learned that hunting is one of the greatest threats to wildlife, and destruction of forest and pollution of rivers and seas are some of the other threats. Next, we discussed about soil. So soil gets harmed in two main ways. First one is due to soil pollution, and second one is due to soil erosion. So we discussed about the ways to manage waste and to control erosion. Next is air. So we discussed that air is one of the resource that will not get over, but air can get polluted, and breathing polluted air can lead to many respiratory diseases, and it can also harm the plants and animals. So that's why we learned about the causes of air pollution and the steps we can follow to reduce air pollution. Lastly, we discussed about water, how to deal with the shortage of water, and how to control water pollution. So students, today we are going to learn about producing and storing food. And in this lesson, we'll be mainly discussing about the steps involved in producing and storing food. So before learning about the steps, you must know what is meant by crops. So what are crops? The plants we grow for our use are called as crops. So I repeat again, the plants we grow for our use are called as crops. And there are two type of crops. First one is food crop and second one is fiber crop. Some crops give us food and they are called as food crops, and some crops, they are not grown for food, they provide us lot of other things and they are called as fiber crop. For example, wheat, maize, paddy are all food crops, whereas cotton and jute are examples for fiber crop. The first step involved in producing the crop is plowing. Plowing means digging the soil. So we dig the soil to loosen the soil, because loosening the soil with a plow makes the soil airy. This means the root of the plant can go deep inside the loose soil very easily in search of water and nutrients. And this also helps the roots of the plant to breathe. And even water can go into loose soil more easily than the hardened soil. So we do plowing with the help of a tool called as plow. A plow has a curved blade for digging, and it can be drawn by animals or by a tractor. So first we studied about plowing. Plowing means digging up the soil to loosen the soil. And the second step is process of improving the fertility of the soil. So children, you all know that plants absorb the nutrients from the soil. So when crops are grown on the same soil for a long time, then the soil loses the nutrients. So nutrients have to be added to the soil to make the soil fertile. So there are two kinds of nutrients that can be added to the soil. So what are the two kinds of nutrients? Manure and fertilizers. So what are manure? Manure means natural soil nutrients are called as manure. So even you can prepare manure at your home. Manure is produced by letting the natural decomposers, example earthworms and the saprophytic organism, act upon the waste such as animal dung and the crop leftover or plant waste. So as we learnt in our previous lesson, compost is a kind of manure which is made by letting the waste decompose in covered pits or in covered jars. Next type is fertilizers. So what is meant by fertilizers? Man-made plant nutrients are called as fertilizers. So fertilizers are artificially prepared by man from the chemicals to improve the fertility of the soil. Students, by the process of soil testing, we can find out which nutrient is deficient in the soil. For example, if nitrogen is deficient in the soil, we can use a fertilizer which is rich in nitrogen. So this is how fertilizers are used to improve the fertility of the soil. So what are the two kinds of nutrients that can be added to the soil? First one is manure. Natural soil nutrients are called as manure, and they are produced by natural decomposers when they act upon plant and animal waste. And second one is fertilizers. So fertilizers are man-made plant nutrients. They are formed from chemicals. And the next process involved is sowing seeds. So seeds are sown after plowing, and seeds can be scattered over the field by hand, as you can see in this picture. And we can also use a seed drill to sow the seeds. So seed drills are attached to the plows. They have funnel shaped bowl which are joined to many tubes. So as the plow dig the field, the seeds drop from the seed drill into the small furrows which are formed by the plow. And the next step is irrigation. So children, what is meant by irrigation? Watering the crops is called as irrigation. Students, can you think how naturally the crop fields get irrigated? Yes, it is through rain. But often that rain is not enough for the crops for irrigation. So then we use water from rivers, lakes, wells and pond. So there are two main methods of irrigating the crop field. So first method, water is allowed to run freely through the fields, and this is mainly done with the help of canals through which water flow. And even groundwater can be used for irrigation. So groundwater is taken out with the help of bore wells, and it is used for irrigation. And the second method for irrigation is by allowing water to drip slowly through holes in the pipes, as you can see in this picture. So water is allowed to flow through pipe from which it drips out through small holes in the pipelines. And in the process of producing the crops, we must also protect the crops. So you may ask me, from what we must protect the crops. So crops have to be protected from rats, insects, birds and some diseases. Children, we use a chemical known as pesticide. So we use this chemical to protect the plants from pests like rats, insects and other harmful organisms. And there are some unwanted plants that grow in the crop fields. So these plants are called as weeds. So we must remove the weeds from the fields to protect our crop. Otherwise, the weeds will compete with the mother plant for water and nutrients from the soil. So weeds can be pulled out or killed with the help of chemicals, and pesticides are usually used for protecting the crops, but there are some disadvantages also, because pesticides pollute the soil and they also pollute the water bodies if they are washed off into the water. Since the pesticides are non-biodegradable, which means they cannot be broken down by natural decomposers, so they remain in the soil and in the water for a long time. So that is why we say pesticides are very harmful for our health and for the environment. Next, we are going to learn about harvesting. So what is meant by harvesting? When the crops are ready to be cut and gathered, we call it as harvesting. Harvesting can be done by hand or with the help of machines, and we call these machines as harvester. So after the cereal crops are gathered, after they are cut and gathered, the grain is separated by a process called as threshing. So what is meant by threshing? The grain is separated by a process which is called as threshing. So in threshing, as you can see in this picture, the crop is stuck against some hard thing, or sometimes the farm animals are made to walk over the crops. And in recent days, machines called as threshers are also used for threshing. Next is winnowing. The outer cover of the grain and the things which are mixed with it are separated by the process called as winnowing. So the outer core of the grain and other things which are mixed to it are separated by a process called as winnowing. So in winnowing, the grain is dropped from a height in such a way that the wind blows away the light cover and the bits of straw in the grain. And most of the times you would have seen your grannies removing the outer covering or the bits of straw or other waste which is mixed with the grain by the process of winnowing. Lastly, we are going to learn about storing. The food has to be stored properly, otherwise the food will get spoiled. Sometimes it is spoiled by insects and microorganisms. That is why food must be stored in dry area, and all the organisms, especially the microorganism, need warmth and moisture. Moisture means little wetness to live. So the two ways of protecting the food from harmful organism are drying. First one is drying and second one is cooling. And the three methods of storing food is cold storage method, pickling and canning. So first let's learn about cold storage. So generally grains and pulses, they do not have much moisture in them. They do not have much wetness in them. So these items, they can be generally stored in sacks or bins because they do not get spoiled as easily as the fruits and vegetables. So mainly the fruits and vegetables are stored in cold storage method, often in refrigerator rooms or in refrigerators. So they can be stored much longer when we store it in a cold place. Next is pickling. So pickling is another way of storing meat, fish and vegetables. So the food is often pickled with the help of salt, vinegar and oil and many other things. So what the salt does is salt removes the moisture from the food and microorganism cannot grow in oil and vinegar. So that is why we use salt, oil and vinegar for preserving, for pickling the food. And some vegetables and many other kind of food can be stored for a long time if they are dried. For example, puppets, chips, chilies. So these are some of the examples of things which can be stored for a long time by drying. Lastly, we are going to learn about canning. So we studied about cold storage method where food is stored in cold environment in refrigerators or in refrigerated rooms. Generally fruits and vegetables are stored in cold storage method. And next we studied about pickling where food is mixed along with salt, vinegar and oil and many other things which help in removing the moisture from the food and preserving the food. Then about drying, and lastly we are going to learn about canning. So canning is another important way of storing the food. So food is first heated to kill the microorganism, then it is packed in airtight containers so that the microorganism cannot enter it from the air. So what happens in canning? First the food is heated, then it is packed in airtight containers so that the microorganism cannot enter the container. So these are the three ways of storing the food. So my dear children, in this class we studied about crops, what is meant by crops and what are the two kinds of crop, fiber crop and food crop. And we also studied about the various steps involved in the process of producing food and storing the food. So children, it's time for you to complete your assignments. You can copy down your classwork notes neatly and complete your book exercise. Thank you. Have a nice day.